Thank you everyone for joining. Good evening or good morning to everyone, and welcome back to the 10th edition of CyberE71 Thursdays. We are delighted to have you all here with us today as we continue to bring insightful discussions with our experts from different backgrounds, tapping into innovation, entrepreneurship, and cybersecurity. Today, we have the pleasure of having Mr. William Lin, CEO and co-founder of AKA Identity, joining us from the US, where he will be sharing key lessons from his book, The VC Field Guide, on what makes a startup successful. As usual, this is a 1-hour session, and feel free to drop your questions on the chat here at any point of time. And by the end of the session, we will have the QA slot to answer all of the questions. And now we say over to you, Will.
Good morning, everyone from the US. Thank you, everyone, for making the time. I'm really looking forward to this one. I actually had the chance to be a judge for the CyberE71 presentations during GITEX last year, and I had a really great experience. I'm just opening up the slides now. The lessons learned from the VC Field Guide. And I'll give you a sense of why I was selected by Wiley to write the book as part of my introduction. I have been a venture capitalist for a decade before I decided to co-found AKA Identity. My story is I was an entrepreneur in college and in high school, and I know some of the people joining us today are in college or recently from college as well. And that entrepreneurial drive is what led me to join a venture capital firm when venture capital wasn't very interesting, actually. The tech bubble had just burst, and a lot of people were losing their jobs, and there weren't very many investor roles in venture capital. As a result. And so in 2012, after the last tech bubble, I was very lucky to be able to join a VC firm out of college. And then on top of that, I got the opportunity to start a new VC firm with my team from previously called Trident Capital as well. And so I had the opportunity to start from the very bottom of a venture capital firm and work my way all the way to the very top. Where I was one of the co-heads of the venture capital firm. You might think, what do you do after that, after you become a co-head of a venture capital firm? Well, in my case, I decided to channel all of my passion and all of my network and all of my experience and skills to starting a new company called AKA Identity. But while I was focused on venture capital for a decade, I looked for other ways to be entrepreneurial as well. And so one of the things I started was a nonprofit called the Security Tinkerers, where I focused all of my attention on mentoring and coaching Chief Information Security Officers, CISOs. Very, very focused on security. And what I found was I was actually a really good career coach. Even though I'd never been a CISO before, many CISOs came to me asking me for help. And that's when I first realized I'm a very framework-centric thinker. I like systems and structures. And so that when you do one thing, what are the 10 different other things you can do after that because of that? And then after you choose that path, what are the 10 other things you can do after that as well? And as you think through all these different options in life, what I really enjoy doing is turning them into frameworks, turning them into a pattern. And that's what led me to write for multiple security outlets. And ultimately, that's what led me to write the VC Field Guide, which makes this talk especially relevant because CyberE71, of course, is very focused on cybersecurity, but also very focused on entrepreneurship as well. The VC field guide, it took me hundreds of hours to write, 200 hours, and when you actually read it, it's only 4 hours. And so it required a lot of consolidation in order to fit into a small book. In fact, I would call the VC field guide a fundamentals book, a beginner's book, not even an advanced book, because if I wanted to write about all the advanced topics after a decade of experience, I would probably have to write 7 books, is what I found. And so VC Field Guide is my first one in a series of 7 books, and you'll get a sense of the structure of what each of the following books will look like as I present to you what I call the VC investment framework. And then lastly, AKA identity. A lot of people who are entrepreneurial, like everyone in this call, are always curious, what does AKA identity do? What do we focus on as well? And what we focus on is identity and access management. We are focused on building the data pipeline and the analytics layer for identity. Today, identity is very siloed with multiple different tools that don't speak to each other. And we're going to be the company that brings them together. Just like I brought people together as a VC, just like I brought CISOs together as a chairman of a nonprofit, and just like I'm focused on bringing students and people into the VC ecosystem by writing the VC field guide as well. All right. Bringing this up before, I do not love to hear myself speak. I do love questions, so please feel free to ask questions. I am very, very comfortable with slowing down and being interrupted. So, all right. So, the framework. What I learned, and I'll talk about this first piece of the framework soon, but a little bit of context and a little bit of fun. As I was a VC, I had to interview for my first job. And once I got the job, I started interviewing others who wanted the job as well. And, when you're interviewing for the first time, you want to prepare for the questions, right? And they're like, hey, what are the common questions people are going to ask you so I can have an answer for them? And in the beginning, there were sort of like 3 common questions that people would try to prepare for. One of them was, how do you evaluate a team, for example? Another one is, how do you evaluate a category? And then another one was, how do you evaluate the financials, for example? And so I spent a lot of time preparing for those questions and to get my job, and then hearing other people answer those questions as well. The other thing that was really important was, as I was making my investments at ForgePoint and TriNet beforehand, I was looking at all my team members and how they made their investment decisions and why did they do what they did. And then I started looking externally, outside of my firm even, why do those people make the investments that they did? And I started inventorying every single way that people diligence a company and all the different things that they care about when they invest in a company. And ultimately, as I was inventorying everyone, I was realizing it fits a framework that already exists, which was the who, what, when, where, why, and how framework. And I was like, oh my God, all right, this needs to be a book. When Wiley selected me, I was like, all right, I'm going to write the book and sort of share what is the who, what, when, where, why, and how of venture capital. Because that's very easy to remember. We all remember that framework from a young age. Now we need to figure out how to apply it to something as complicated and as important as venture capital. And so the book is intended to help fill in those gaps so that it becomes second nature. Like when you think of who in as a startup, you know exactly what you're thinking. What is the factor? What is the thing that you're evaluating as well? And to me, when I was writing each of these chapters on the who, what, when, where, why, and how of venture capital, that's when I realized each question could be worth a book by itself. And And so I do not attempt to try to say everything I've ever possibly learned on how to evaluate a team in one chapter, or in case this even one talk, because I could probably spend the whole hour talking about team. But that's why I need questions. So I need, I'd love for you to guide me in terms of where you want to go, for instance, on team, because we can go very, very deep if you like as well. But this is a presentation that I actually put together for my own VCs, for my own team, as I was an investor. So this is something that I was using as a mentor and coach for my own VC at ForgePoint. So you get a sense in terms of what proprietary information and proprietary knowledge that comes from within a firm. So let's start with...
I can see a question, Will, on the chat.
Yes, let's do it.
So Mayan is asking, what makes a good team for a startup, in your opinion?
So I love this question. I spent so much time thinking about this question. Like, it is not even funny how much you think about it. What makes a good team? I think if I were to summarize it into one oversimplified word, it would be balance. There are a lot of teams that are unbalanced when they first start. And the reason why they're unbalanced is because it's really difficult to work with people who are very different from you and have different skills from you as well. Your network, for instance, just naturally makes it easier for you to spend time with people more like you. Like, let's say you're an engineer and you want to go start a company. All your coworkers are engineers. So it's very easy for you to start a whole company with 2 engineers, for example. And if you want to add that balance, you might be working with someone that you don't know very well. And now you have to go get to know this person. And there's a lot of, the co-founder relationship is a lot like any relationship with another human as well, where you're going to get in fights. And those fights might lead to breakups. And there are co-founder breakups all the time. And where and the thing with co-founders is that it's not even like a friendship. It's like a marriage. Like you have equity and contracts and employees, and there's just a lot there. And so what I do, just to answer the co-founder question, follow that thread a little bit, is there are co-founder surveys and questionnaires out there where it asks you a lot of the hard questions and asks you to answer those questions together. And I recommend looking for those, especially from US-based venture capital firms that have a lot of experience helping match co-founders as well. In fact, when I started my own company, I'd used many of those very same surveys and questionnaires with my own co-founder. And even though I co-founded the Security Tinkers with my co-founder, Rob Fry, even though I'd known my co-founder, Rob, for a decade, I still went through that survey, and I still learned so much about Rob and about how he would deal with very difficult situations. And Rob learned a lot about me as well. How would I deal with very difficult situations? So an example of a hard question: when does it make sense for you to leave? When does it make sense for you not to be part of the company anymore as a co-founder? Right? Like, everyone has different criteria, right? Some people are going to say, I'm never going to leave this company. I'm a co-founder. I'm never going to leave, kind of situation. And some people are going to say something else. And, it's really important to know what that means as well. And so when I think about this criteria, when I think about team, balance, it's really hard. And every new person sort of changes the culture. Every new person changes how this team will work together. Whether you hire very experienced people, for example, or you hire very inexperienced people, there's pros and cons to every single one of them. And the culture that results when you combine a group of people comes from the people that you hire, and as well as comes from the culture from top down. What does the people who have decision-making powers over who can get fired and hired, over who can get promoted and get bonuses. Those kinds of decisions made by people at the top drive the culture of every organization and helps create that balance as well.
Thank you for that. Well, I can see Natasha. She's extending the question from Maya. So, does team composition influence the way VC or investors invest in the company?
It definitely does. Especially in the earliest days. That is mainly the only thing you can count on. Like in the earliest days, when you don't have revenue yet, you don't have customers yet, the main thing you can do is evaluate the team, because there's so much change that happens in the earliest days of a startup. Yes, for instance, you might start, like we have all these stories, right? Of like, for instance, Slack, right? It was initially a gaming company. It was a video game company, and then it turned into a workplace productivity company. Slack was something that they used internally, and then they built a whole company around it. That didn't happen by accident, right? That happened because of the team that was leading Slack as well. And there is a big reason why VCs love multi-time entrepreneurs, people who have built a company, sold the company, took a break, and we came back to building the next company as well. Is because they have a very flexible, dynamic mindset, right? They can sort of target a problem, and then as each obstacle comes towards them, they can move around those obstacles as well. If it's a team where there isn't that kind of experience, what you sort of want to do is you want to wait for them to cross a gigantic obstacle first, and then you jump in. And there's going to be many more obstacles in front of them, but they've already proven that they've crossed a gigantic obstacle that matters to you as a VC. And so, for instance, for one VC, they might only care about revenue. Like, oh, you've generated 500K of revenue. That's a gigantic obstacle for a first-time entrepreneur. I'm very impressed by that. We're going to invest in you. I'm going to help you go to the next stage, that kind of thing. Another one might be really interested in technology, and they might say, "Wow, you built," like for instance, open source is a very common place where people invest now. Someone built an open source project, lots of people are using it, and now they're commercializing that open source project into a company as well. So they're saying, "Wow, like 50,000 people actually are using your software. Like you built something that people actually want and need. That's a gigantic obstacle. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to help you do the other things that you don't know how to do as well." So it really depends from investor to investor, but the biggest thing, especially in the early stages, is the people, and this is the most common factor, especially when you think about early stage. Let me give you the opposite version of why this is so important. Like, I said, I think about this a lot, and the reality is every investor thinks about this a lot. Like, this is something that everyone naturally spends a lot of time thinking, which is, and you spend a lot of time thinking about this when you have failure, when things are not going well, when you as an investor feel powerless because you cannot do anything, right? All you can do is control the money, you can control the board, that kind of thing. But whether or not this company is successful or not does not depend on the investor. It depends on the entrepreneurs. It depends on people running the business and thinking about it and working on it on a day-to-day basis as well. And so when you have that first negative experience or series of negative experiences, you eventually realize, as an investor, you're not in control. The people in the company are in control. And so as a result, I want to invest in people that I trust. That when things are going well, great, it's easy to be happy. We're all gonna be happy. But when things are not going well, they are doing the work and they're going to figure it out. And I'm gonna be there to support, but I can't because I do not have control over the dynamic as well. And as a result, every experienced VC has felt pain. Every experienced VC has gone through that pattern of realizing that they're no longer in control, and that the people are the most important parts of when you invest in a company. Because we're not robots, right? We all have thoughts and dreams and emotions and ways we do work and all that, right? Like, and so you have to factor all that, the people component of it, into every investment decision.
Yeah. I think you might have answered this next question partially, but Chris was asking, in a startup, is it more important is the team or the founder and the leader of the company or the startup?
First of all, thank you everyone for asking questions. You know, I've been in these where the audience, there's a lot of audience members, and you know, they for whatever reason don't feel comfortable asking questions. So this is great. So co-founder versus the founding team, you know, what's more important? It really depends on what stage the company is at. So if you're investing when it's like two people, obviously there's a mathematical obviousness, right? The only thing that matters is the co-founders, but there is something else on top of that, behind that as well, which is hiring. As a investor, you want to have a sense of what's this person's capability, the leadership's capability of hiring as well. And if it's at the stage where there's only two people, and it's an experienced co-founder, then it doesn't matter, right? Because then you already know that they have hired people, they've managed people, they led people, they'll be just fine, that kind of situation. But if you're brand new and you're two people, they're going to and you don't have all the skills you need to get the company to the next level, right? Like for instance, let's say it's two business people and you need to build a software in order to go to the next stage. That means you need engineers, for example, right? That means that we need proof that you can hire engineers that can deliver software, and you can communicate with engineers and show them that you know what needs to be built, and you can hire the engineers with the right skills as well. And so if the newer you are as a co-founding team, the more important the co-founder is. The more experienced you are, the more important it is that we look at the cohesive team. And how did this experienced co-founder construct their founding team is also a very telling thing. You know, if you're a very experienced co-founder and your first 5 hires are all people who are very senior and none of them know how to write code, or, you know, none of them they're all leaders, but they're not doers, for example, that tells you a lot in terms of how this organization intends to be run. They intend to immediately get to 50 people because all these leaders need to manage people in order to get stuff, in order to do work. And so that requires a lot of money in order to just even get this company off the ground, for example.
Thank you for that, Will. Salah has a question. So what is the difference between cybersecurity and networking security?
Lovely question. Network security is a part of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity includes so much. Includes cloud security, endpoint security, identity security, data security. It basically includes almost every kind of security underneath it. And in some ways, you can even include like incident response, for instance, under cybersecurity. All right, perfect. Let me jump because I do that is a big that's a big chapter. It's also a big book whenever when I get a chance to write my next book as well. But so why don't I jump into the next one real quick just so we can mix up the conversation as well, which is around problem. Actually, sorry, before I do that, Shamsa, are there other questions around people around team?
No other questions. You can continue to the problem. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so this is, I feel like I'm actually giving you sort of a guide to how to grow as a VC here. And by the way, learning how to be a VC is just as important as learning how to be an entrepreneur. My thinking is everyone's an investor, right? So if you join a company, you're investing your own career into that company. If you, of course, start a company, you're investing a lot into the company. And then if you're investing, if you're a VC, then you're investing money into the company as well. So everyone's an investor. So these are critical decisions and questions that you should be asking yourself as with every important decision that you make as well. And so next is what the who, what, when, or why, which is the problem. This one I think is the one that feels obvious, but as you get deeper and deeper, you start realizing that the problem is more nuanced than you could ever have had imagined. There's a common pattern with almost every single person who first starts trying to start a company without having worked with startups before, which is they want to find a creative idea, right? They're like, oh, there's a problem and this is a nice solution for it. Oh my gosh, this is an idea. This is a company kind of dynamic. And many times when that happens, I would say that probably 80% of the time, maybe even more, that problem is a problem, yes. But is it a problem that needs to be solved, for example? So for instance, we all have a problem with laundry. Like we all have to do it, or we hire someone to do it, but it's a problem. It's something that we have to do. One thing we could do is build this super fancy machine that will like take your laundry for you and wash it and dry it and fold it for you and put it in your closet and all that kind of stuff as well. There's a version of that which is a nice have. It's like, well, I already have a solution that works. Yes, it is a problem, but I already have a solution that works. In order to turn it into a must-have, you have to change the game entirely with that kind of problem. And so when you think about the problem and when investors invest in the problem, a lot of the effort is thinking about, is this a must-have or a nice-to-have? Like, is this a problem that is, and the phrase is keeping someone up at night. As a CEO, as an investor, as a security leader, there are certainly times when things are keeping me up at night. When something is very, very stressful, and I wish something could take this problem away from me. And I wish that I didn't have to do this anymore. Like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is the worst thing. I can't sleep. My family relationships are tired. Everything. I'm not eating food. I'm not, going, all my habits are being lost because this thing is so freaking painful. That is what a real problem is. That is a problem where I would be like, you know what? I would invest a decent chunk of my salary to solve this problem because I do not want to do this anymore, kind of situation. And sometimes that is actually not even software. Sometimes that's actually people, for example. And so there are so many things to think about when you think about the problem. And it's not just any problem that can become a venture capital startup. It is a problem that, number one, is so painful. It's a must-have kind of solution. And on top of that, it is a problem that should be solved by a startup. And then on top of that, there's one more factor underneath, which will be the next factor as well in terms of when you think about the problem. Specifically in security, and this is what I wrote internally, and it's still true. A lot of customers are struggling with vaporware, right? So they do have a problem, and a company says, I can solve this problem for you, and they're able to build up enough momentum and hype around the company. And in POCs, it looks really good. It's like, oh my gosh, I have this horrible problem. This POC shows me how you're going to take that problem away from me. I love it, kind of situation. They buy it, and they ultimately find out, oh my gosh, in order for me to get this value, either I have to be perfect or I have to do a lot of customization in order to get this product perfect for me. And this sort of turns into hey, it's not, for the vendor says, it's not my problem. My software works great. It's your problem. You have a broken organization, so your product won't work. My product doesn't work with your organization, but I'm going to help you. And a year later, it's still not working. Sorry, it's your problem, not mine, kind of situation. There's a lot of this situation that occurs because of all the startups in cybersecurity as well. All right, perfect. So I really didn't want to get to this one because it's associated with the problem, but this one also kicks off a lot of the other following chapters as well, which is timing. So, there's different versions, right? Like, so for instance, the who, that's something that you really learned when you had your first negative experience with the team. The what, the problem, I think people naturally think about problems when they think about the next startup, but there's so much more to learn in terms of the what. The when, this one is, I would say, an expert level thing. Like, when I talk about interviewing for venture capital firms and those questions that you prepare for in the past, this question doesn't come up, but it is something that only sort of very experienced VCs think about, which is timing. There is a common phrase, right? Solution ahead of its time. And that is what sort of helps you sort of start to see that this is a common theme. It's just that it's not natural. Not a lot of people think about timing when they think about starting a company. A lot of people think about all those other factors first. But if you want to be very successful, you need to consider timing. You need to consider, when does this problem that we're talking about just now go from a nice to have problem to a must have? Like, holy crap, this is the worst thing in my life kind of situation. Example of that, and the common reasons for timing this show up is technology disruptions. So for instance, but before AWS and GCP, everyone had data centers. And so all of their compute and all their data was stored in data centers. And so they had tools for those data centers. And they had it all. They had it to a point where they were happy. They were mature enough. And there was people here and there using AWS or Azure or something like that. And you're like, okay, well, that's a problem. This problem. There's data in Azure that I don't know about. There's problem. Okay. But is this going to be something that I can't sleep because of this problem? And for a while, it's not. It's like, yes, it's a problem. I really want to solve it, but there isn't a good solution for it, and I have to go justify budget to go solve all the stuff that's in the AWS, and it's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, COVID happens. All of a sudden, everyone shifts to public cloud. All of a sudden, all the new tools for developers are all in public cloud. All of a sudden, we go from like 90% data center to like 50-50. And like, oh my gosh. All right, now this is a gigantic problem. Like, there's so much stuff going on in public cloud that I do not have any control over, any visibility over, and all these bad things could happen as well. And so that kicks off the need for public cloud security, kicks off the need for public cloud observability. It shifts that problem from a nice to have to a must have as well. Timing comes into so many different factors as well. And so, for instance, a really fun one and a common one right now, right, is all these food delivery, laundry delivery, every kinds of delivery companies that exist out there. It's not a brand new idea. Like, the people thought of that during the last tech bubble. The difference was that technology wasn't ready back then like it is now. Mobile phones, internet, payment infrastructure, people's comfort with using app and spending money on apps, all those things didn't exist in the past. And so, Webvan was a company before all the food delivery companies that exist today that started that idea. It wasn't a brand new one, but it was timing that made all the difference as well. And so, one of the things you could do as an entrepreneur is to look at what failed in the past and use those as inspiration and move away from this idea of like, oh my gosh, I have this idea and no one else has thought of. And I need to start this company because if I don't start this company, someone else will. And this is going to be such a big thing kind of situation. Ideas are a dime a dozen. What is really critical is execution. And so you can use timing to your advantage by looking at what failed in the past and use that to also predict the future as well because of different things. Because technology is different now, the environment's different now, the people are different then, for example, as well. A quick time check. How much more do we have? I have 3 more, and then I want to make sure I don't go over. Where are we now?
We have 15 minutes left.
Oh my gosh. All right.
Yeah.
I'll speed through. Okay. Those 3 are really, really critical. I think the most valuable, especially if you're in an early stage in your early in your journey. A lot of these start becoming less. They're critical if you want to build a unicorn, a public company, just a gigantic company. All of them are critical. But those first 3 are really good ones to get started with, and then as you're going. So where is the market? So this one is TAM. VCs classically call it TAM, which is total addressable market. How much budget is being spent every year in this market as well. This is where it's important to consider the goal of your venture capital firm or the VC that you're talking to. Are they looking for multi-billion-dollar exits? Are they looking for multiple $100 million exits? And depending on what kind of exit they're looking for, that also defines what kind of markets they can invest in as well. And so if you're a multi-billion-dollar fund, you tend to be looking for multi-billion-dollar exits, for example. And in order for a multi-billion-dollar exit, this company has to generate hundreds of millions of revenue as a result. And so you need to invest in a market where people are spending hundreds of millions. And not only that, you're just one startup. You can't own the entire market. So it has to be one where people are spending $1 billion for you to be hundreds of millions in order for you to be a multi-billion-dollar company as well. And so one thing that's really important is to consider the size of the market. So if you are looking to build this gigantic company, it has to be solving a problem that a lot of people have and a lot of people are willing to spend money for or are already spending money for as well. The solution. So we talked about the problem there before. Now we talk about the solution now. This is a very sophisticated one as well. It sounds obvious. Oh, yeah, solution part. You really want to, but when you really get into it and you realize how many pivots you have to do, how many decisions you have to make, how the market keeps changing on you. You might have a good solution now, but all of a sudden it's not a good solution later, for example, as well. This is one where the role of product management has become more or less the responsible for making sure the solution is able to be flexible, be long-term, solve immediate problems while also serving future problems. There's so much stuff that's wrapped up into this. But this need happens more after you've reached your first inflection point. And it's also valuable to help you get to the first inflection point. But it just really depends on what the team construction looks like. If you're a brand new team, I mentioned that before, people generally want you to find some velocity first before investing. But if you're an experienced team, you might bring on someone in product management early on to help you find your first inflection point, because it is a highly analytical and highly dynamic job as well. All right, I think I went really slow for the first few slides, and now I'm going really fast. So let me go spend a lot of time on this one, because I think this one is really meaty, and this one is also something that that generally comes with a lot of experience, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an investor as well. And this factor right here, it does tend to be more important for Series B and later. Go to market. It really depends on what type of customer you're selling to. We are talking, this is a CyberE71 webinar, so that we're talking about cybersecurity. And who buys cybersecurity? It's usually businesses, and enterprises, not consumers, right? And so the way that we buy and sell things to consumers is very different than the way we buy and sell things to companies. And there tends to be either a marketing-driven way of selling to these customers or a sales-driven way or a combination of doing it. And I would say that almost all these skills, marketing, direct sales, you do not learn in school. There's no class, there's no boot camp, there's no way really of learning how to sell or how to market to businesses until you've actually done it or until you've actually seen it as well. A lot of us, when we're younger and we think about sales, or at least I'm a different generation, so maybe this isn't what the current generation thinks of when they think of sales. But my generation, I thought of used car salespeople. Like they'll say anything to get a sale, for example, and they will promise the world, and they will sell you something that you don't actually want, and you will regret it once you go home, kind of situation. When you get into sales and you start doing it, start realizing that sure, that might be something that somewhat works. It doesn't really work, but it is something that sometimes people can do. What really works is when you are a partner to your customers instead, and you're helping them helping them deal with a problem that keeps them up at night, and you're selling optimally a solution that actually solves that problem and takes that problem off of their plate as well. And so when you get to the place where you've already started generating a couple $1 million and you're raising your Series B to scale up your go-to-market, more likely than not, other companies will also be at that stage, either maybe ahead of you, maybe slightly behind you, but more likely than not, if this is a really important space that everyone wants to be in, you're going to have multiple people competing with you in the space. And that's when everything flips, right? Technology is a game of inches. Go-to-market is a game of miles. That lever is going to be so much more impactful to the growth of your company than how good your technology is at this point in time. But this is only something that you can do once you're further on as a company. And there have been plenty of mediocre products that have become really great businesses. Economically successful businesses with good gross margins, making a lot of profit, growing year after year as well. And so how do you build this, right? How do you build a go-to-market? How do you learn all those kinds of different factors as well? This is traditionally learned by more or less hiring a salesperson. And what companies tend to do is around their Series A. So after they've gotten, let's say, 10 million of revenue, for example, then they'll usually hire either a VP or a director level of sales. And that person will probably help generate the first couple of million of revenue. And what happens after that is this person's great as an individual salesperson. They may have hired some people, but then that person reached their limit in terms of their ability to manage and hire and drive a sales team. And so then Series B, you hire even more experienced salesperson to manage and build a new sales team. And in the Series C or D, now you're getting ready for an IPO. And so you hire yet another person and then build around it as well. This is where your investors, if you haven't hired a salesperson before, it becomes super critical, because this is when they leverage their experience to help you decide who this person should be, right? Because the salesperson tends to, or sales leader, is going to be very opinionated, and they're going to be running and doing things. They need a lot of autonomy to do what they do as well. And so if they need a lot of autonomy, you're not going to see everything that they're doing. And so as a result, and then the other thing is, a common pattern is hire a salesperson, and sales takes a long time because you have to build up a pipeline, and customers take many, many months, even years to sell and close. And so you don't really know if you've been successful as a company. You don't really know if you've been successful as a salesperson, hiring the salesperson, until 6 months after you hire them. And then most people usually trying to let it keep going. Like, hey, I made this bet. Let's see what happens. They usually take a year. Even if things aren't going well, they usually take a year before they cut bait and start over again. And so that is a whole year of not growing or not hitting your expectations. That's a whole year of everyone building and spending, all these salaries, and all of a sudden you have to go fundraise again without growth, and no one wants to give you money as well. And so very, 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 very important. This is one of those things that if you haven't done a startup before, you're going to learn on the fly, and you hope that you have great people around you to help you with this need that the company has as well. All right. Now, I think a common question, especially for people who are sort of earlier in their careers, right? When and how do I start a company? And notice I said when. When is really important. I mentioned before timing. Timing is definitely a big factor in terms of starting a company. I think everyone, when they see a successful experience, classic one is Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like, for instance, right out of college, or dropped out of college even, right, to start Facebook. And so sometimes people think, oh, I need to do this as early as I can. What the data actually shows, especially in cybersecurity, is that the most successful founders tend to be in their 40s or later. And this is a little bit, of all the other stuff I mentioned before, right? Like, what makes a good salesperson? What is a problem that keeps someone up at night? When's the right timing to do this? What is the right product that solves this problem and in sustainable and long-term, that kind of situation? How do I build a phenomenal team from the very beginning if I don't have relationships or network as well? And I'm not certainly saying that you have to start a company in 40s afterwards. It's just the hit rate. The probability is a lot higher. And there is also a bit of selection bias too, right? Like, if you're in your 40s and you're starting a company, you either it's part of it is because you're potentially already very successful in your career, and you're starting the company because you want to take it to the next level as well. But I think one of the things that you can do no matter when, if you decide to start companies now, or you've already started one, or you decide to start a company later, is you think about everything in terms of risk. Startups are risk. And so if you haven't started it yet, think about every single thing you can do to reduce that risk. What can you do as you're building your career? What can you do as you're networking? What can you do? What you can do? And so these are, to me, the top three. One, hiring A players. Attracting A players to join you is a very difficult thing to do. And a lot of that has to do with trust in the leader, trust in the co-founders as well. And what likely happens and mostly happens in the earliest stages is The co-founders are A players, and other people want to follow these A players, for example. Or another scenario is you hire the best that you can, and then every time that the company gets further and further along, you keep upgrading, you keep hiring the next level. So for instance, when you're first starting and you have no revenue, you hire a salesperson that is not super experienced yet, but they can help you get to that first 500K of revenue. And then now you get the 500K, you raise the next round. Now you need someone to help you get to the first 3 million, right? And perhaps this person helped you get to 500K, can't help you get to 3 million. So you hire someone else, so you hire someone else, and you hire someone else. Second one is relationships, trust with customers. It's very, very tough to do. It is something that you can work on earlier before you start a company or in the early stages of starting a company. Credibility and trust comes in multiple different ways. There's not just one way of doing it, but if you can find ways to do that, it will make your life easier. And then lastly, prioritization. When you're starting a company in the early stages and until the end of time, basically with a company, there's always so many things that you can do at the same time as well. The things that you can do in the early stages is prioritize and figure out what is the most important thing. Like what is out of the seemingly 20 things I could be doing right now, what is the number one thing I can do? And being confident in knowing that is the number one thing you can do. All right. That is the last slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Will, for the insightful session. I believe most of this was very beneficial for our startups and the audience here. And now we can go through maybe a few last questions given the time. So for our audience, if you would like to have your mic open and ask the question directly, let us know so we can enable it. In the meanwhile, I can see there are a few questions on the chat. Maybe first one is more related into cybersecurity. So the question from Nidal is how to stay cyber safe and how can we keep safe from hackers?
Yeah. As an individual, it does really depend on how if you fit in the standard buckets of what bad actors do. If you're not in a high risk bucket, and high risk buckets are like public officials. High risk buckets are now, unfortunately, our aging population, our retiree population. There's people have found lots of ways to scam those people as well. If you're not in a high risk population, the best things you can do are hygiene. So password managers, I think, are really valuable, for example, and probably the most common problem that every single one of us has, beyond the basics like antivirus, for example. The other part is education. So, for instance, knowing if you're in a high risk population or not, with regards to cybersecurity, there's education and finding that out. And then the other part is education with regards to avoiding things that are typically scams and threats that people put out there. So, for instance, a very common scam and threat back in my generation was like the Prince scam, right? Someone says, "Oh, I have all this money that's locked up. Send me $100,000. I'll send you $1 million later," kind of thing. But nowadays, there's other versions of that scam, and to be mindful of them and be slightly paranoid, because there's definitely the phrase of "there is no such thing as a free lunch" for a reason. So.
Thank you for that, Will. Another question, this is more related into startups and entrepreneurship. So the question from Kauthar is, at the beginning of the startup, it can get overwhelming navigating between talking to the investors, sharing your startup with the world, and building your startup and developing your own personal technical skills. So how do you have, or do you have any suggestion on how can we manage and balance all these? Or if we should focus on a couple and the rest will follow?
So unfortunately, as a co-founder or CEO, you don't have a choice. Like there is everything, like it does come to you to have to balance everything. There are two fundamental ways of answering this question, though. Structured framework ways of answering this question. One is the only thing that matters is revenue. That's all investors care about, because revenue is your track record. It proves that you're building something that people want to buy and will spend money on. It proves that you can sell it, proves that you can do all this kind of stuff, right? It is the one metric that measures your success. And so if you can grow revenue, everything you do towards focusing on that is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day. But and if you grow revenue so much, there are, that eventually everything else will become easier as well. It'll be easier to talk to investors. It would be easier to grow some more because now you have customers who will talk to other customers, for example. It'll be easier to hire people because they want to work for a company that's healthy and growing. In terms of your own personal technical skills, that is something that I think really depends on the mix of the organization as well. There is a point where, initially you're wearing multiple hats in the early stages of the company, but eventually you need to focus and prioritize as well. So it depends on the stage as well. But eventually there's going to be a point where everyone should have one primary responsibility that they are 100% focused on making sure it's successful as well. And so if it's technical, then that's great. If it's business, if it's sales, if it's operations, if it's tech, talent and HR, it could be one of many, many things as well. But if you want one to focus on and everything will follow, revenue. That's all that matters.
Thank you, Will. So one last question from Ghala. How can young entrepreneurs gain trust and credibility in the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, this one is so I've seen many people come out of nowhere, right? Where they all of a sudden they're a trusted person in the community. And I would say that there are multiple paths. I think one path is if you're very technical and you're very research oriented and that kind of thing, doing a lot of finding something really interesting and valuable and researching it and then going to conferences and presenting it. If you researched something and you found some really brilliant insights, people are going to want to hear about it. And so, for instance, there are examples of, teenage hackers that have broken into different things, for example, and they showed the world and they taught people from the research that they've done on that front as well, and that's helped them start to build trust and reputation. Other ways could come in the form of networking primarily. That does work. Like if you invest time into networking, invest time in trying to find ways to be helpful to people, you invest time in making friends and being personable, people are going to want to introduce you to the other friends as well, and over time you'll build a network that way in terms of trust. There is I hate using these common phrases that you would say to someone who is younger, because I heard them many times myself, right? Like, everything, there's no shortcuts and it takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, because there's so many people in this world and, things don't come easy, right? Like, they're not supposed to. And so, personally, for me to build my own trust and my own reputation, I felt like I had to invest 4 or 5 years before I started getting to the point where I could, where it started growing exponentially. But yeah, that unfortunately, I wanted it to happen faster than that, but for me it didn't. I'm sure there are other ways to do it even faster, and people have certainly made that happen as well.
Thank you, Will. Maybe one last question from me is where can we find your book?
Yeah, yeah. So I believe it is on Amazon. That's I think the easiest place to find it, and I know that you can buy it internationally through Amazon as well. So I believe the numbers are, I think we've sold like 8,000, 10,000 copies of it now. So it's been doing really well, and yeah, all the money that it makes, it goes towards nonprofits as well. So. And it's something that I really wanted to do to help to do things like this, right? Where, there are many times when someone can't join this webinar. They maybe didn't have access to it. They didn't know about CyberE71. How are they going to learn about startups? They have no access, right? And so this gives you the ability to learn from yourself. And, there is 5 hours of reading in there, but it took 200 hours to write. And so by reading it, you'll get much more value than even this conversation, because I had to fit all of that book into 45 minutes of slides. So, but I'm super pleased and delighted. I've always had a great experience with CyberE71 and everyone that's associated with it. So honored to be back.
Thank you so much, Will, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Will, for the insightful session, and we look forward to welcome you all during our next keynote. You can follow us on social media to find out when is it and join it. Thank you so much.